So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I really love our meeting, our like getting together of people interested in philosophy of immunology from both immunological and philosophical perspectives. So the title of my presentation is Philosophy of Immunology, Mapping the Nascent Field. But my goal really is just it's an attempt at a synthesis of the field of philosophy, of a small field of philosophy of immunology. So first introduction, a little bit of introduction. At the onset of computational era, like immunology found itself at the crossroads. Like some of its long-held assumptions are being challenged, and there are some entrenched ideas about disease protection that I think they no longer hold. And Susumu Ono, he kind of summarized the state of immunology in the following way. He said, knowing everything but understanding nothing. And I think that even though he said it many years ago, I think it's still kind of hot. So now, as this broader picture of disease protection is like eluding us, is philosophy is encroaching into the field of immunology, because like this picture of disease protection is not so straightforward as it seems. So now philosophy is encroaching into the field of immunology, and surprisingly, it finds like it's very well familiar areas of interest, like the problem of self, for example, the problem of individuality, mind-body interaction, disease causation, science and society related problems, and theory, for example, as well, right? As well as biosemiotics, like signaling and so on. So this is quite surprising that now philosophy is finding the same these areas that have always been of interest to this subject. And now these different topics are analyzed like across three dimensions. We can say dimensions of history, philosophy, and science. But what is a philosophical view of immunology, one could ask? And so Macfarlane Burnett, he famously stated that immunology has always seemed to me more a problem in philosophy than a practical science. And philosophy of immunology is trying to do exactly that. It's trying to look at immunology as a problem in philosophy. And in other words, philosophy of immunology is like a shared field of philosophy and immunology. A kind of bridge between these two. But what did philosophy of immunology accomplish so far? So here I would like to, this is the aim of my presentation, just to kind of summarize, synthesize what philosophy of immunology has done so far. And it will be up to us to judge and decide how much it has been done so far. But I think first a bit of historical context is in place, namely early 20th century conception of the body. The conception of the body as an integrated whole, profoundly individuated, ruptured from the outside. And so Ernest Starling, who was the author of the idea of hormone as a substance that is producing one part of the body to influence another part of the body, kind of contributed to this notion of the body as an integrated whole, individuated and ruptured from the outside. But as an apotheosis of this view, Walter Cannon formulated the concept of homeostasis. And this concept was based on Claude Bernard's notion of the stability of inner bodily processes and a kind of separation of inner space and the outer space. Now, so how we should view the immune system, how the immune system was understood from this point of view. So this was nicely depicted by Annie-Marie Moulin in her paper, The Immune System, the History of the Idea. Namely, the immune system was conceived as a stable configuration in time and space, coordinating its defined components in a dynamic network. This is how the immune system was originally conceived. And that early immunologists were thinking about the immune system or about immunity in this framework of the body as an integrated whole, I think is attested by the work of Charles Richer, who said that living being is stable. The defense of the organism consists precisely in equilibrium and in maintaining its stable state. So it's about the stable state, maintaining a kind of individuated body. So now fitting into this framework, the notion of immune self by Macfarlane Burnett was meant to refer to the universe of tolerated antigens. Okay, so the immune self was understood as the universe of all the antigens that an organism tolerates. So he imagined that tolerance is achieved by elimination of lymphocytes, which following the process of diversification bind to the antigens they recognize in a developing embryo. So here you can see this process. And those lymphocytes that survive this negative selection process then can recognize any foreign antigen, and they can expand and proliferate upon encountering the foreign antigen. So the immune self, so defined as this stable universe of antigens that are defined in the embryo, is invariant. He imagined it's invariant. So we are born with a defined immune self, we can say, with defined separation between self and non-self. And this never changes because it's a process only in the embryo. So he imagined self as something stable, invariant, insular, pretty much like in classical philosophy, the notion of self. So all of this made sense. But the idea of immune self became modified with time, and the idea of immune self as a stable, immutable, was challenged by later studies, which revealed that this process of selection takes place not only in the embryo, but also later in life. So your self is not your essence, in a sense, unchangeable essence, but this is something changing, something more dynamic. And while it was found indeed that lymphocytes are eliminated in this process of negative and positive selection, it appeared in the case of T cells, then also B cells, for example, can change the receptors through a receptor editing process, and T cells may differentiate into regulatory T cells. So this is something that anyway was not expected by Burnett. And it appeared also that many lymphocytes, autoreactive lymphocytes, escape this process of selection, and they can either become anergic or undergo apoptosis. Some of them may also, their potentially deleterious effects of this autoreactive T cells may be mitigated by regulatory T cells potentially in the periphery. So anyway, my point is that what was initially conceived as stable, invariant, insular became kind of more dynamic, more dependent on the context, more changeable during our lifetime. And so again, clonal selection takes place throughout life. And also it was found that autologous tissues can induce specific antibody production. So for example, like brain tissues, if they are injected with adjuvants, they may induce antibody production. Also, it was found that autoreactive clones are ubiquitous in healthy subjects, and also maybe they potentially also play some important roles in the organism, regular roles. So our notion of immune self has changed, and rather than being considered as stable, invariant, insular, it was realized that it's more unstable, dynamic, nebulous, much like in this image here. Okay, so this is how the notion of immune self has changed, and here is a I think very important book for philosophy of immunology by Alfred Tauber, The Immune Self, in which he was showing this transition in our understanding of immune self, exactly from this stable invariant idea to the unstable and dynamic one. And he was showing how this transition in the understanding of self was also paralleling changes in our understanding of personal self. So our philosophical understanding and scientific understanding, they were going hand in hand, and he was showing how it was actually possible. So related to the problem of self of immune self is the problem of immune individuality, and here a major contribution was by Peter Medower, who noted that organisms are immunologically unique, and that the role of the immune system, he said, is to determine what belongs and what does not belong to an individual. So he suggested, for example, that a skin graft could be used as a detection assay of individuality. So if your body accepts a graft, it means that we have to do the same individual. If it rejects this tissue graft, we have to do with a different individual. And in this particular context, he stated the following: the concept of immunological tolerance has implications that are deeply philosophical. He added, in the worst sense of the word, because I think what he meant to say is that it's so obscure, so kind of also deep, maybe at some level, but also obscure. And later studies revealed that this kind of this delineation of an immunological individual is mediated by recognition of MHC molecules. So if the T cells recognize foreign MHC fragments, they will trigger an immune response against these transplanted grafts. And also there is an indirect form of allorecognition in which a fragment of MHC molecule from another individual may also trigger the same kind of rejection response. So everything seemed so clear-cut. Again, a little bit like with the problem of self. Now, individual was delineated, the immune system recognizing, monitoring, and looking for MHC molecules to reject everything that is foreign. Yeah. But again, as the research progressed, our ideas of immune individuality has also changed. Namely, it appeared that there are some, that these foreign grafts may be tolerized after some time. Right? There is transplantation tolerance phenomenon. And on top of that, these mechanisms appear to be shared by also tumor tolerance. So we have tumors and neoantigens, and they are also tolerated. And there is also some evidence to suggest that similar mechanisms mediate tumor tolerance and transplantation tolerance. So in a scenario in which an antigen-presenting cell presents an antigen, a neoantigen or a foreign antigen, to effector T cells, this activation may be somehow suppressed by staggered exposure to this antigen, by tonic stimulation by low antigen load, as well as phenomena like clonal exhaustion, where high antigen load and persistent inflammation can also suppress the effector T cell mediated responses. And now, if we add into that also immunosuppressive microenvironment, especially low level of danger signals, regulatory T cells, and so on and so forth, then what seemed initially as a mechanism that would obviously reject a foreign graft may actually lead to eventually to a tolerance to that graft. And here, I think crucial is the book by Thomas Pradot, The Limits of the Self, in which he analyzed how the continuity of interaction between antigens and receptors may lead to some tolerogenic outcomes. That persistent presence of a foreign antigen can eventually lead to tolerance. So now, if we add into that also an uncertain status of a holobiont as an individual, and there was a lot of discussion on that, and here I'm just giving one example, but I'm talking about discussion in philosophical sort of circles, and also like a phenomena like microchimerism, where, for example, fetal cells may persist in the mother's body for a really long time, and then also intricate problem of immune individuality in pregnancy that was also extensively analyzed also in philosophy of immunology. Then we can see that individuality, immune individuality, appears as something porous, constantly redelineated, codependent. So rather than as it was, again, initially conceived, enclosed, delineated, autonomous. Things are not so clear-cut again. So this is, so this is another problem. So I told you about immune self, about immune individuality, and now still another topic, the sort of intersection of philosophy and immunology that is already being explored by our philosophy colleagues, and also is of enormous interest to philosophy of immunology, is a question of mind-body interaction. Now, and here, again, these scientific examples, these are just examples, of course, and just to give you a glimpse of like why these ideas are changing. And so here I would like to give an example of blood-brain barrier. Now, crucial for the discovery of blood-brain barrier were studies by Paul Ehrlich. So Paul Ehrlich, famous immunologist, he injected dye into blood of mice, of experimental animals, and he observed that the peripheral tissues become stained as a consequence, but not the brain, not brainstem. And so this implied that there is some sort of barrier, between blood vessels and the brain that prevents this dye from penetrating the brain tissue. And later studies suggested that there is something like a blood-brain barrier, namely a sort of seal of endothelial cells, okay, that, as it was initially conceived, is impermeable to immune cells, to immune molecules. It's like a seal. But then later studies also kind of changed this view, and they showed that there are numerous transportation systems in the endothelial cells that can mediate bidirectional transport of cytokines like prostaglandins, cytokines, chemokines, nitric oxide, and so on. So there is a communication between the immune system and the brain, and also vice versa. Now, in addition, it was found that cytokines like tumor necrosis factor alpha, for example, immune cells, and so on, can act on blood-brain barrier and influence these transportation systems, as well as may compromise the permeability or alter the permeability of these endothelial cells. And if we add into that the expression of toll-like receptors on endothelial cells, then the blood-brain barrier appears to be like a major, like a legitimate part of the immune system activity, in a sense, we can say. Now, the cytokines that are transported across the endothelial layer, they can influence mood and behavior. On the other hand, the cytokines that are produced by cells of the central nervous system can modulate the immune system. So rather than about the blood-brain barrier, we should talk about blood-brain interface. This is more like a neuroimmune communication system rather than actually a barrier. So this is a part of the blood-brain barrier immune system and the central nervous system axis. But there is also hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis and microbiota gut-brain axis that also includes or involves a lot of immune-related components. And again, our colleagues, our philosophy of immunology colleagues were exploring this problem in detail and investigating their implications for that. So this, I think, changes our view of the mind in the following way. So the mind in this particular framework appears as embedded, extended, because now the brain cells may release factors that will directly modulate the immune system and vice versa. So it's kind of an extended system, causally entangled with other bodily systems. And this goes against more classical view of the mind as disembodied, like something abstract. internal, like being only seated in the brain and nowhere else, and having no impact on other systems. And maybe also causally inert, like there is like an epiphenomenalism and the idea that the mind is really cannot affect causally body, in a sense. So again, you can see that there was some sort of change, and it was also like mind seemed something really isolated, internal, and close within the brain. But then it kind of became extended and vague. Okay. So still another problem that at the interface of immunology and philosophy is related to disease causation. Okay. So disease causation, so our, like the classical understanding of especially infectious disease causation was by Robert Koch, and famous are his postulates. So here, so his postulates of Robert Koch, this is just a set of criteria to determine whether a particular microorganism is a cause of a disease or not. And what do these criteria say, really? It's that if there is like a sick animal, okay, and if somebody isolates a microorganism, bacterium, for example, from the sick animal, and grows this bacterium in a culture, and then injects it into a susceptible animal, then this animal is expected to also get sick or to die. Okay. But so this was a kind of very straightforward linear causation. Here you have a microbe, you administer it to a susceptible host, and this host should get sick. But again, things are more complex, this is what immunology is teaching us, that, for example, for the respiratory tract infections, it was found that the great majority of these infections are not caused by microbes that come from the outside. But the majority of respiratory tract infections are caused by microorganisms that are already part of the microbial ecosystem. So how an infectious disease is caused in that case, right? Because it's not about bacterium or fungi or whatever coming from the outside and infecting you or making you sick. It has more to do with dysbiosis or alteration in the disruption in the balance of interaction between microorganisms in the respiratory tract mucosa, which is full of microorganisms against previous hypotheses. And also loss of tolerance in the immune system as well, because in the normal conditions, these immune cells may promote kind of tolerogenic type responses rather than kind of damaging inflammatory responses. So it appears that infectious disease has more to do with the state of the immune system, with the ecosystem of microorganisms, rather than with just something coming from the outside and infecting the organism. Because then, only then, tissue damage may happen. So if we add into that type 2 inflammation and the complexities that are related to this kind of inflammation that is not really inflammatory, as we heard from today, and also the fluid boundaries between commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism that were also considered by our colleagues, again, as a part of my attempt to summarize the studies in philosophy of immunology, and also disease tolerance. The disease causation no longer seems like near unidirectional, context independent. It's more like a web-like. It has some web-like structure. It's reciprocal. It's context dependent. So this is, I think, how immunology helps us to redefine the idea of disease causation. And so when we look at disease causation in this novel way, the core postulates, they no longer hold. Just the mere presence of a microorganism does not have to mean that the animal is sick automatically. Okay. So let me. Okay. So I told you about how philosophy of immunology is how immunology contributed to philosophy and vice versa in understanding of cell, individuality, disease causation, mind-body interaction. These are also only some topics. There are more of them, but some of them. And I would like to note that these changing views on these philosophical problems are associated with a particular view of the immune system. Namely, the view of the immune system as a sort of extended system. And here we have a paper by Martin Zak and Gregor Gleichsteiner. So the immune system is an extended system. The center dispersed. Every cell is an immune cell. So the toll-like receptors are expressed on virtually every cell in the body. So ubiquitous. Okay, forms of innate and adaptive immunity can be found in all living creatures, from bacteria to humans. Okay, here you have a paper by Sophie, adaptive immunity or evolutionary adaptation, which was raising these issues in the context of adaptive immunity. That adaptive immunity is like also versatile, mixed use, multi-purpose, flexible. So the immune system can be developmental and other regulatory functions in the organism, not just this protection from a disease. Also ambiguous in the sense that it's non-binary. It's not like self, non-self, danger, not danger. It's more fluid. It's more a spectrum of responses, okay? Involving a spectrum of responses dependent on the larger ecology of interaction. So here, Alfred Tauber's book, Immunity, the Evolution of an Idea, analyzing these changing views. So where are we heading? I mean, where are we heading with all of these changing views of the immune system and philosophical views of the immune system? So somebody noted that these features, like a system that is extended, ubiquitous, versatile, ambiguous, what kind of system is it really? So, and this may sound a little bit provocative here, but I think that there is some important point in that namely the immune system now appears to be a sort of postmodern object. And Donna Haraway, she wrote in the 1980s, the immune system is ambiguously a postmodern object. So in this similar context already, it was becoming clear that the immune system is like that. And now I think it's even more accurate than ever before. And so to make her point, she contrasted like the changing view of the immune system already back then to the kind of an image of the immune system from 1970s, when the immune system was understood as, of course, a very stable and defined system in which there is something like God, understood as generator of diversity, like the diversification mechanism, like recombination, activating genes, and so on, that basically whose action determines the course of all kinds of immune reactions, because it was before even the innate immunity and the importance of innate immunity was that much recognized. So it was thought that this generator of diversity, like defining the repertoire of antigen receptors, may somehow also establish or determine the status of somebody's immunity. So this is from a textbook to immunology by this author to illustrate this. Okay, so this is how the view of the this is, I think, like as part of my attempt to summarize like the state of philosophy of immunology. I think this is hopefully accurate. And And now, like, where again, we can go even one step further and ask, like, what is really the implicated view of the body that is emerging out of this? So here we have immune cell that is unstable, dynamic, nebulous, and individuality that is like porous, constantly redelineated. This is actually taken from Thomas's book that is constantly redelineated, which I absolutely agree. Codependent, dependent on other microbes and so on. The mind embodied, extended, causally entangled with all kinds of systems. And the disease causation, which is web-like, reciprocal, context-dependent, the immune system, it's extended, also ubiquitous, versatile. It's everywhere, basically. Everything has an immune system. Everything is an immune system. So my question is, what is the implicated view of the body then? Like, so I think that just to not tell you immediately, just wait a little bit to make it more, I hope, exciting. I think this is this is the implicated view of the body. So yeah, it's fuzzy, fluid, ambiguous again, ontologically vague, contingent, extended, of course, and Donna Haraway already noted that Western individuated bodies neither stopped nor started the skin. Yeah, basically. So the organism, in a sense, became dismantled. I don't know how to say. It's like it's no longer so like stable and unified, because now you have these like small centers of ecosystems. Like you have some local ecosystems. It's not that it's centralized. There's no central system that is like coordinating everything. Nothing is like the generator of diversity, whatever it was considered to be a god, is just one of many processes of immune responses. So it's a change. So actually, this image on the right is a depiction of a postmodern body. It's a depiction of a postmodern body, and I think it captures this changing view by a British sculptor named Anthony Gormley. I think that he really maybe nice. So what is postmodern body? It's a contested notion that stands as an icon of the fluidity, hybridity, and complexity of corporeality in contemporary technologically driven societies. So Alfred Tauber was writing about postmodernism and immune selfhood, and here just I was trying to extend it to other aspects of the immune system as well. So now I think this brings us to the question, like, why do we think about the immune system in a certain way, in a particular way? Is it just we observe some evidence or some data and we just reflect in our theories what we see, what we perceive? So actually, there is a kind of body of scholarship on that subject, and a group of philosophers and social scientists were attempting to address this question, pointing at the reciprocal exchanges between science and culture, and how our preconceived ideas map into the reality we attempt to understand. So here you can see some of the books that were either directly or indirectly were addressing this problem. The question, like, why do we think about the immune system in a certain way? You can find the answer in these books. This includes the politics of immunity, immunities, and the age of immunology, and immunitary life, and body work depending. The titles already should give you an idea of it. So there are, so the hypothesis is that there are potentially some reciprocal exchanges between science and culture, because it actually appears that the way we think about the immune system and the body in immunology, it actually basically reflects what we think about the body and about the body and most other systems in culture in general, in a sense. So, well, the idiom of invasion, self-non-self discrimination, resistance, immunity, and tolerance is at the heart of social and political frameworks that inform our daily existence, we can say, our understanding of the relationship between an individual and the other and the collective. So we can hear about that a lot, about invasion, self-non-self discrimination. It's part of our daily, daily routine. We hear about community and versus immunity and this kind of like in radio or in TV. So conclusions and future perspectives. I think I'm finishing a little bit too early, right? I still have time.
Yeah, you have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Okay. So I was trying to gauge like how much time. So conclusions and future perspectives. So philosophy of immunology is challenging the classical depiction of the organism as a stable, delineated entity. So from this inner space, outer space separation to more a kind of vague and nebulous entity. And so the division between inside and outside was questioned, and its fluidity and fluidity became emphasized. So the status of once well-delineated immune self identity and cognition and causation is no longer certain. So shared conceptual frameworks drive conceptualization of immunity, and the society reinforces one another. So I think you should be aware of that. I mean, also in the laboratory, that we impose, as Dominic said, I think that I really like what he said, that we impose onto what we see our preconceived ideas. And where do these preconceived ideas come from? From our daily life, from what we read, from what we watch, from what we talk about. We cannot help it. This is how it is. The metaphors we choose, that we prefer to talk about the immune system in a certain way. For example, if immunology was being developed at the same time in China, for example, people would talk about the immune system in a different way, in terms of balance, equilibrium, and so on, rather than, for example, individuality being defended or protected against the outside and as an isolated entity. So this brings me to the question, like, what's coming next? So we reached a kind of postmodern age of culture and science in general. But my question, what is coming next? And here, maybe this is just to open a discussion in a sense, perhaps a renewed interest in truth and realism, or maybe it will be like a even step further to completely disentangle. And like also what Dominic said, that now maybe it just doesn't make sense to talk about the immune system at all, about the individuality itself, because now everything is the immune system. So, thank you very much, though.
Please go ahead. Hello, thank you very much. I found this very, very interesting. Maybe to abstract even a bit further, like if we believe in physics and in thermodynamics, then of course, like everything is kind of connected and nothing can be by itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the Chinese culture, I found that interesting point. For me, I'm a medical doctor, and we weren't learned quite anything about alternative medicine and stuff like that. And the Chinese medicine operates with concepts like qi, or with concepts like acupressure, or stuff like that. And the Western medicine completely dismisses it for the reason that there is no clear delineation, there is no clear evidence, there are no clear foundations, even though that in part there might be physiological concepts that we just don't know about. Qi or acupressure. I'm just it's to use this bigger view of philosophical concept of human body and immunity, but also to delegate the functional boundaries on which we can operate.
Right. So I agree with you. I mean, absolutely. I think that this just supports the view that the kind of our culture, in a sense, influences, right? If not, somebody would say dictates, but I wouldn't go that far. But in a sense, influences what we see, what we conceive, and like Chinese medicine. Once we go deeper, maybe into like the philosophical and immunological problem of mind-body interaction, maybe then we'll start getting some sort of glimpse of what these qi and other concepts that are not translatable into a paradigm of modern medicine really mean. So this is maybe another step that we could take to actually towards more integrative vision of the immune system, that once we maybe reach the level at which we see how everything is interconnected and relative and dependent on also our own conceptual systems, then maybe we'll also start appreciating and understanding other kind of systems, and include and especially mind-body interaction, and how the brain and the cytokines that are released by the brain to influence the immune system may actually justify some of the concepts of Chinese medicine, or also other medical systems. So thank you very much for your question.
I absolutely listen to you. Yeah, please go ahead, Jules.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for your talk. I really loved how you brought Donna Haraway into it, and particularly like the body-mind barrier. And I was thinking of Elizabeth Wilson's book, Gut Feminism, right? Where he says, well, probably like constructing the brain as this like controlling organ is also only part of like early modern science, ever since now how it constructed gender rationality versus irrationality, blah, blah, blah. And then I was thinking, well, maybe also immunology could be one of the, like a postmodern discipline, because they're doing a pretty well job in like getting rid of dichotomies, right? Because it's not only like brain gut, it's also like adaptive innate. It's all these things that are like very well dissolved. But I think a lot of other also biological disciplines way more stick to this kind of dichotomies.
This is so. But I think I think that you may be right that it's specifically immunology that is like seeing things that way, and philosophy also finds a lot of in common with with immunology. But I think maybe, but this is just maybe my hypothesis. But also in other parts of biology we see a similar trend with like systems biology and the more kind of the more data we see, the more like we can see how everything is interconnected, how everything is relative and kind of vague and nebulous. Right? So we kind of losing grip of what initially seemed to be so clear. So here we have immune. Here we have immune response. Here we have a tolerance, and everything seemed so easy. But now things are becoming kind of more difficult. And I think that maybe also in genetics and other fields, we also see like, okay, we have epigenetics, and here we have different layers of regulation and endless and everything. So I would think that maybe so there is a similar transition in other parts of biology as well, but this is just my guess. But I appreciate your review.
Please,
Right, very nice talk. I think very philosophical, and of course, what always I expect from philosophical talks is just to provoke and motivate thinking, which is perfectly well. So I think that I would like to get back to your notion of stability and instability, where you can define what it is. I don't know whether you can really say that the human body or whatever organism is unstable. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, looking at you, you're pretty stable. Look at it, we are all stable. We are not really
fell into the wall. So just the walls that
but you know what I mean? So stability, of course, there's a dynamic complexity and everything. But if you look at somebody, you don't think it's unstable. And I think that during the development, we go through the less or more stable. For example, many things are changing. Immune system, more. So we are getting transitional from one relatively stable stage to another, which is through transition. But I don't know how we actually define stability in the sense of philosophical meaning. And other thing is the outer and inner space. I think when even farther than me, showing that postmodern sort of body. But that actually sort of contrasts with what you say. You said you have inner and outer space. In your body, as it would, it's just the, it's a line which shows you contours, but you don't see inner and outer space. You know what I mean? So definition of inner and outer space doesn't mean, for example, I asked,
is the lumen of intestine inner space or not? It's not. I mean, open your mouth. It's just a tube which is connected to the environment. So it's not genetically us. But immunologically, of course, this is the system which actually regulates 80% of your immune system. 80% of immune system is in the intestine. Microbiota plays a major role in regulating that. So even if it is outer space, it still has a huge regulatory role for our immune system and our bodies. So I would agree that there is inner and outer space, but again, the borders, functional borders, are probably have to be very carefully defined what it is. I mean, there is a border of the skin versus environment. This is clear distinction. But functionally, I don't know what the border is really, because we always breed bacteria from environment. We are in a constant sort of not integration, but communication with environment. So where does it end? So the functional interaction goes far beyond your skin. And so the definition of space is also, but definitely it is a mass of body. It is not transparent. So I know this is symbolic, but still I think that we have to sort of maintain the integrity in the way that the organism is sort of defined by its borders somehow. And we can think about the physical borders versus functional borders or immunological borders. But the question to you is, how do you look at the? So I wanted to know the stability, instability, and space. How, in your mind, these two things are defined?
So, really, very good questions. Like really, just getting into the point of my presentation. So about stability and instability, I have to admit I didn't mean something like very, like, let's say, precise or like there's a notion of stability in physics or, I didn't mean anything like that. But I meant more like a changeable, changing its what is inside, what is outside, like this kind of problem. So, for example, like even with inflammation, because like this, if we think about immune individuality, like for example, the inflammation that is changing, like for example, in the classical view, we will have like no inflammation or inflammation, right? And now we are changing that into saying that there is a kind of physiological process of inflammation. It's dynamic, it's changing. So, for example, may involve different kinds of molecules, different kinds of cells. This kind of, this is what I meant. But also about stability in the sense like homeostasis, right? So, so this is what I really mean by stability. The homeostasis was meant to mean that you have a stable state. It's the same, homeo, all the time. And this, and I questioned it on the basis of the observation that this state is never really the same. It never returns to exactly the same state, because the state has to be always adjusted to the circumstances. Okay, if we take, for example, I don't know, gut microbiome and the mucosal immune system, for example, depending on the composition of the microbiota, we have different kinds of cells involved, different kinds of molecules, and so on. So it never returns to the same state. Okay, we cannot say, oh, now it returned to the state of no inflammation, or now it came to the point of activation. We cannot pinpoint these things. So the idea that the body is ever the same, I don't think it's accurate. And I think that philosophy of immunology is showing us that. Maybe we can talk about allostasis, but that you mentioned. Okay, but this is a different idea, because allostasis means that something is changing. It's not the same, because the idea of homeostasis was meant to mean it's always the same. So this is what I mean by stability. Like homeo, it's never the same. And for the other question of the, like, okay, macroscopically, yes. Okay, we can look at somebody and say, oh, this is an individual. Oh, I have no doubts. This is the body. This is specific body. But if we look microscopically, and with the especially application of like the tools of computational immunology and computational biology, then we can see that these borders that macroscopically seem so well defined, they're no longer so clear cut. And now, for example, maybe it appears that some of the microbiota, as you mentioned, this example of the lumen, of the intestinal lumen, is, I think, also good. But in general, the microbial ecosystem that we are associated with. So now, is it part of the body or not? Okay, and this is very in what sense? So I don't think that you can give like a definite answer that yes, this is part of your body, this is not part of your body. It's something in between, and this is something vague, and we can have a long discussion and never come to a conclusion like, okay, so is your body finishing at the skin or at the lumen, or is it also including your bacteria? And what about bacteriophages? But what about, for example, the herd immunity? Okay, isn't not also a part of our extended body, in a sense, that is also kind of protecting us and defining what is us and what is not us? So so this is my point, that we don't have we cannot prove at this point that the body is finishing at the skin, for example, and it's not incorporating, for example, skin microbiome. And the macroscopically, yes, of course, I agree, of course, that's no question. But the point is that now we see that the number of bacteria that we interact with on the daily basis exceeds the number of our own cells. So maybe it's the opposite. Maybe we are kind of owned by them, in a sense, and not the other. Yes, we are feeding. Yes, from their point of view, it's like that. So maybe we are part of the extended body of a bacterium rather than the other way around. So my point is that we could have a very long discussion about it, but never come to any definite conclusion. It will be always based on some arbitrary definitions and say, okay, I define the body this way or this way. But this would be depending only on the definition. So that's, I guess, my point. So for the stability, I think just denying of ever the body and the immune system ever having the same state, and the borders of the body, like, okay, if we use the postgenomic transcriptomic methods, then we can see that these borders are not so as it seems.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's just then, because biological system is open system, nobody can even assume that open system is going to be the same. Cannot be, because it exchanges energy and information. That has to be changed. In terms of immunology, then, this is immunological self. Immunological self doesn't really mean genetically the individual. It really includes all immune experience. So as soon as you have infection, you have another experience, you are not the same. And every day we are getting whatever 1,000 infections which you even don't know because they are clear and immediately. So every day you change 1,000 times, let's say. Yeah? So of course it's never ending changing, but the stability physiologically would be the range of possible changes within the normality or homeostasis. So we are not really getting out of the normal stage, which makes you sick, which makes you physiologically, I don't know, physiologically unstable, let's say. So that's what I meant. So homeostasis, I don't think cannot be really defined. Never anything ever changes in open system. Open system really gives you the range of physiological state in which you can exist in a normal way. Of course, when you have infection, you are dying. Well, they are very extreme about that range, but then again, you will get back. So I think that for immunology is also very important to really somehow conceptualize this, as you suggested. It's an excellent sort of idea to define stability and stability. What does it really mean in immunological sense?
And if it's still useful notion, because like I don't know, let's for example, again referring to the microbiota example, okay, the microbiota composition will change, so there will be different demands for example, concentration of IgA antibodies, for example. So what would be the range? I don't think that there will be much range about what is the normal healthy concentration of IgA antibodies in the gut, for example. really depends. It depends on the ecosystem in a sense, and maybe will be some parameters, but for which only there will be a range. But this range will also depend on the context and also maybe that of course some parameters like our body temperature may be more or less stable. But my question is it still useful to refer to this notion in the context of the data?
Yeah. Some immunologists, they say if you eat hamburger, your microbiota changes right away. But it's still it's adaptation to the content of the lumen. It's not unphysiological. It's just such a plasticity and flexibility of those open systems to really adapt to those changes in a way that they will still keep homeostasis.
Yeah, but also, like, my point is also that we shouldn't look at it only from the side of the human, because it's a kind of interplay of the bacteria and immune cells, and none of them is in a way privileged in this interaction. So we change the microbiota changes us, and it's a kind of a kind of system that maybe the body is not stable, but this interaction may also get some kind of form of stability, local stability, because of immune cells and immune molecules interacting with colonizing microorganisms. So maybe they can reach a kind of stability, but this will be like a local sort of.
So I'm partisan of what Dominic is bringing up. So there's one very simple fact about biochemical stability of an organism. Like for us, 99% of the chemical matter of the body is less than 2 years old. So it's most likely, younger or as big with you for a shorter time than your eyeglasses. She's really strong. She feels pretty stable in her biochemical configuration, right? And so dealing with the sun as a dynamically equilibrated, stable configuration of form and substance is a reality that's everywhere. And I think now only right with stability to lose that fact, like a stable configuration of a dynamic equilibrium sun, or my dynamic equilibrium, or my biological identity having a dynamic equilibrium and its stability is, I think we can't give it up. When you're talking about the whole biome interaction matrix, right? I mean, you can call it that. The different biological things that I need for my biological stability are an interaction network that allows me to have my biochemical stability. But again, it's dynamical stability. So I think we need that. We can't.
Yeah, for the, I can maybe, because I have to also. So maybe for the dynamic stability, maybe I'm more prone to accept than just stability. But my point is that there are many equilibriums here. There is an equilibrium between classes of cells, equilibrium between immune cells and stromal cells, equilibrium between bacteria and immune cells. And so there are many layers of equilibrium that eventually, I'm not a physicist to say it, but I don't know how actually all these equilibriums, like so many levels of them and layers of them and local and global and all of them can actually can produce something that we will say, oh, this is a stable organism. You know what I mean? There are just many, so we have the balance between Th1, Th2, and then we have between some commensal bacterium of that kind so we have many, the equilibriums are everywhere, basically, So if there are so many of them and they are changing all the time, because this equilibrium states will be changing, because if Th1s will change and Th2 will change and this will change, then actually eventually we get a state in which we cannot really talk about we can say about some dynamic equilibrium systems changing all the time and at different levels of organization. There's also equilibrium within the cells. as well. So there are also equilibriums between, I don't know, small interfering RNA and something else, and long interfering. There's also some sort of equilibrium, right, between them. So there are so many of them that if we add all of them, and there will be probably millions of them, then eventually maybe we'll get to the point in which we cannot just say, oh, this is a firm entity, like.
The scientists to me would flip around. So the problems as a scientist have not having a little book large enough to collect the catalog of equilibriums is not the problem of biology, right? That's the problem in the notebook. But the whole immune system characterization is about the resilience of a dynamically equilibrium system to assault, to disruption. So then we have to say that it's the resilience of this multi-centric, multi-layered dynamical equilibrium system that is the object of engagement here.
But there is this term called homeostasis, right, which might make way more sense in that context.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with this one.
Yes.
It's like you have substasis, which is real my ancient Greek is like but it's still like a homeo that keeps these things stable in a way, but by all the time.
So sounds good.
It moves with the environment. So this is one construction.
That's entirely accurate. I think this is the right word. I think.
I just wanted to sort of ask, it's maybe a bit provocative, but I mean, this is fascinating and it's fun. You know, immunology is already seen as uniquely complex and scary to the medical world. You show them your spinning, crazy postmodern body, and we've lost every medic in the, you know, in the place. So, maybe not you. So I mean, how do we make this useful for? So the aim, I think, of medicine is to bring us back to stability. Although just listening to what I heard, maybe it's actually to make us more resilient to change. So maybe I'm answering my own question, but I mean, you know, how do we make this useful for medicine when they really need to define what stability is, because that's what they're trying to bring us back to.
So how is it useful? I think that one aspect is that it just gives like a hopefully a bigger image, like a stepping back and looking at the whole, like, what is body now? What is the immune system now? And that's one thing. Also, another thing is maybe the realization, like how much of what we see depends on what we really want to see or what we are looking for. And there was another important thing that you mentioned. One was about useful, and the other one was
to, I don't know, to make us more resilient, or I don't know.
But because there was an important question that you asked.
About medicine, maybe? Something very doctor?
I mean, just that the aim of medicine is to bring us back to stability.
Oh, yes, this point, exactly. So, you know, so I have to say, because, like, to be honest, because my goal here is, like, to be, like, really honest, to just kind of summarize work on philosophy of knowledge, not necessarily give my own opinion, even though it's also kind of, you can guess, more or less. But so this was actually the point of this last slide, to say, like, what is next, really, because this is what we reached, and this is like my diagnosis in a sense. And now maybe I suggest perhaps a renewed interest in truth and realism. Maybe this would be the next step, or that's a possible scenario here. Another, because I said, look, what can happen after this kind of postmodern deconstruction of the body, in a sense. So we can go even further, and this is something what Dominic said in his talk, that we have an immune system everywhere, and maybe it doesn't make sense anymore to talk about the immune system at all. So that would be one extreme, and the other one would be just to go back to more like truth and realism again, and to reconsider some, because we may think, oh, so now everything is like, if there is everything is immune system, maybe nothing is immune system, and so on. So maybe we now need some more precise definitions, and more, maybe we should define things more precisely to put things on track again and to redefine, for example, immune self in such a way that it makes sense, for example, and that it's not some invariant core or antigenic core of the individual, for example. This is just an open question. I don't know. I don't have answers.
It's very clear from everything here that what we need are better definitions, and because technology is changing how we think. Whether we have philosophers helping us change the way we think or not, technology is forcing us to rethink in ways that you've described very beautifully. That I wouldn't have been able to put them that way, but we need to maybe redefine a lot of things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think one also possibility, one way to proceed from there.
Yeah, that would be useful.
So yeah, let me first also pay attention to Zoom. So there's one comment, great thought, agree with Bart's conclusion that fuzzy ontology is probably the most appropriate framework to capture what our current immunology is describing. So it's just a comment. And now the question, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. I have a question. Given the amazing integration and scope of the immune system, why is this an extended view of immunology and not of physiology? Is it perhaps because we are considering the immune system as the organizing system or entity? Why should we call it extended immunity and not extended physiology?
So, I mean, part of the reason is because maybe we are focusing here on the immune system because we are like summarizing the philosophy of immunology, but the notion of but these extended systems, they may also they have been also the presence of this kind of extension was made also in other parts of biology as well, I think. And for example, I don't know, in like extended phenotype, for example, there's a notion of extended phenotype, right? Some people are familiar with that. Extended memory, or there are many aspects of the functioning of the organism can be extended, can include elements that are not in the microscopic confines of the organism. So, I think the main reason why we are focusing on that is just because we are focusing on the immune system.
Yeah. So, Victor. Yeah.
Yes. I just wanted to continue with the question you had because that's also what came to my mind. What is the practical use of this in medicine, or what is it for medical doctors as that is field I'm in? And from my point of view, my experience with medical education was all based on static and kind of limited point of view on what happens in human body. Precisely because it's too complex to grasp, we are just going to take a limited part of it and try to present it to you, instead of going there, showing you what happens really, and providing you with the tools how to manage the situations in the medicine. And maybe that could be a practical use of such thinking. Like it's all very complicated. You cannot approach patients with the thought that you don't know what's happening exactly. It's all too complex, and that you're very sorry not to have any means to help him because you don't know which molecule interacts with which receptor. But to see the broader picture can prevent the idiotism, if you're familiar with the term. This occurred to me lately as very descriptory for the problem of modern medicine, that we just practice the experience that was given us by the mentors, not thinking about it ourselves.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that philosophy, as we understand it, philosophy of immunology here is, I think it's crucial for like scientific research, because like exactly as you said, like if you take any, I think if you take even the recent copy of a textbook to immunology, you would learn that the immune system is a system of self-non-self discrimination, right? That toll-like receptors, they recognize microbial associated molecular patterns, and that the immune system is about killing bacteria, but we know that the immune system is involved in developmental processes, in repair, and also cognitive processes and so on. For example, about the self-non-self discrimination, you know, that is also our view of this process has changed profoundly, and also so this is a kind of simplified view of the process. And now also, I think it's crucial for somebody to understand, like, who is in the laboratory and, for example, is I don't know, studying, let's say the immune self again, just to reach to the same, so that this person knows what he or she is talking about. Okay, because if for example, without philosophy of immunology, without this kind of conceptual work, then we don't know what we are talking about, right? So if we understand self, for example, as changeable, or you know, in that particular way, then we can actually quite accurately communicate. Okay, or we are talking about individual, or we said, oh, this organism is doing that or that. So now, do we mean an organism in the sense of what, genetic organism only, or also with microbiota, or an organism derived of all the associated bacteria, or not? And if we are not specific about it, and then we have to also know why we think about for example, about the organism in this extended sense as an ecosystem, or what kind of what it changes, or in our view, then I think it's essential, because sometimes we can see that these conceptual traps, many authors fall into them, and asking sometimes questions like, for example, I remember, like, at the beginning of my interest in philosophy of immunology, I was quite shocked to, for example, find an article about, like, how the title of the paper was, how does the toll-like receptor, let's say, 4 distinguishes between pathogens and non-pathogens. So this is like already a thesis that somebody asked, okay, how does this receptor discriminate between pathogens and non-pathogens? Like, even if it was possible. So without, like, asking ourselves what is actually immune recognition, for example, and it can be achieved by a single receptor? Can a single molecule on a cell tell which microbe is pathogenic and which is not pathogenic? Like, if it was something inherent, like it was something that is already written on the code of this microbe, what it is it good or is it bad? This doesn't make sense. So if you step into the laboratory with this question, I don't think you can have a good answer, because you are asking a wrong question in a sense. So I think that this is, I think, the importance of that. And now, if you ask yourself, okay, what does it mean to be a pathogen? What does it mean to be a commensal? And how does it depend on the context and on other on the immune system itself and on its responses, its recognition? Then you can see that being a pathogen or non-pathogen is not something that is ingrained in the code of this bacterium, in its molecules. So this is just an example of how important it is to address these kinds of problems in the kind of also experimental setting. Because if we ask this kind of question, I don't know how you can have a good data, good evidence with that. Just an example.
So unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you
So much.